Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about this conversation.
Me too. I'm so delighted to have you here. I love talking to women like you who've had this really beautiful, interesting, rich life history and coming here with all the wisdom and all of the work that you've done. I can't wait to talk to you about everything you've done. So, my first question for every guest is to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves to the listening audience and viewing audience in their own words about who they are and what they're doing these days.
Well, I would say I'm a woman on a journey, and definitely where life is right now. I have been straddling being a businesswoman, a business leader, a mother, a wife, on boards, and I have my own initiatives off the side of my desk. So I think I represent so many of your listeners. And I feel like I've been really capturing the lessons I've gained along the way in my books, which I would have never thought I would write books because I'm very math minded. I'm dyslexic. But I think sometimes the universe has a way of kind of ushering you along to some of your life's work. And I would have never thought I could actually put a book together because I used to get D's on my English papers because I'm really bad at sentence structure. But the wisdom I've gathered from so many women ahead of me was too instrumental to just sit on my desktop. And so I started writing the stories for my daughter, which then became stories for my friends, which became my first book. And that first book really launched me into a whole discussion of women from the first book, which was like, how do you keep it all going? How do you have this all that everybody markets to you? How do you keep your senses about you without losing your inner compass? And, I didn't even market that first book because I had a full time leadership role in Silicon Valley and I didn't want anyone at my tech company to not take me seriously or think I was distracted with this book. So I wrote it and basically just put it on the shelf. But people started learning about it and I started having discussions with women that then they want to talk about how to have it all, but they also want to talk about how to get on boards, how to get promoted, how to find a sponsor. And so I logged every question they asked me for years. And then I spent 2 years researching why so many women are in middle management. And that was really the basis of my second book, which I could have said, here's how to get promoted or here's how to get on a board. But I named it Accelerate Your Impact because so many women want to have more influence and impact than they have today, which then set me on a whole other journey, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, no, it's such a beautiful journey and such a useful tool for many of us who are trying to also um, find our equal footing because women haven't had the same trajectory as men in the C-suite, flight path. If you take that route or you go into any business where you want to be in a leadership role or have more responsibility, there are still real challenges to that. So I love that those were your books as well. My second question I've kept in since the beginning. I'm always curious to check in with my audience, I'm sorry, with my guest, and ask them what was their early childhood experience with religion or spirituality or nothing at all. And then fast forward to where you are present and what you're sort of grounding yourself in as an adult.
I love this question, and I have a lot of deep thoughts about how religion plays into our soul journey, into our spiritual journey. So I look forward to discussing this further. But I do remember going to the church. I was brought up Catholic, and we did all the process things you were supposed to do until my family went through a really, really hard time, and we were basically had so little means that they turned to the church to get a loan, and they were declined and they had been donating, not only in their marriage, but all, as a child all the way through. And I think when they needed help, they felt like they really couldn't get it. And after that point, we were not as committed to the church as we previously, like as I was brought up. And I think that it was a very interesting twist of events. I later went back and became a PSR teacher. But now in my 50s, I have a really long journey with my experience with organized religion, not only in this lifetime, but others.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That seems to be the common theme is we all sort of get plunked into something and then we land somewhere else, which is really interesting. So that what we're doing here today, aside from highlighting all of your wonderful work, is highlighting particularly this book called Seeking 74 Key Findings to Raise Your Energy, Sidestep Your Self-Doubts, and Align Your Life's Work, which is a lot of things to be working through. And I love that you wrote this book. So why don't we start with the baseline of just describing what this book is about, what its intention was, and then I want to ask you some specific questions that will help the audience, on their journey and then pick up this book to work with you?
I look to the side because I'm like, oh, where to start? Where to start? Well, I guess the best place to start is that my journey is no different than many, many women's journeys that I come across, and even men too. Like, we are conditioned to get there, be there, you know, achieve that level of success. And what we realize when we're going down that path is that the carrot continues to move. And well into my 40s, I was striving and driving, but I had this lingering unsettledness inside me that each year grew louder and louder. And for one of my birthdays, I decided to go to Sedona because I felt like I needed clarity on what I should be doing. I had a thriving career in tech, but I was pulled in another direction that made absolutely no sense, that had no revenue per se, and that was taking me off this path that I had worked decades to achieve. And I think that was the beginning of my seeking. When I committed to that seeking, it was funny because things around me started to crumble. Relationships, experiences, my dad was sick, everything started to just kind of have tower moments all over the place. And I was ready to take on the journey. I just didn't know I had to do it so fiercely. And so I had to go on an inner journey, which I didn't really recognize at first. I thought I was going to continue that really masculine energy of things outside my body, stretching, reaching, getting. And I really needed to balance out the energy in my human body and also illuminate the light of my soul. And that took some serious work.
What was the time frame for that? Would you say like 6 years, 5 years, 10 years? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so I would say that my real tower moments hit in 2016, and I would say that I'm still on the journey, but I spent the last
Hmm.
year and a half writing about it and sharing all the techniques, tools, practitioners, books that I've used to really focus in on energy that is no longer serving me, to decouple the stories that may have been impacting my decisions and my self-worth, and finding ways to create more energy or more enlightenment or even more joy in my life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm interested also in your story of the transition from tech to where you are and how you're contributing really beautifully to the collective in a more entrepreneurial and freelance way, which is, I think, where we're going because people realize we have a limited amount of energy to expend, and I think the pandemic really highlighted where we want to expend that energy. And there's just been this really big, I think, consciousness shift, but an energetic shift around that. And for somebody who's thinking about doing this, and I want to be careful not to generalize because everyone's monetary and financial status is different. But for you making that transition, I want to ask you specifically, how hard was that transition for you? How easy was it? And then what were some like fears and doubts you had along the way of trying to go through this whole process?
Well, in a nutshell, I'll try to sum it up, but let me just say it started
Okay.
off the side of my desk way back in 2008. I started my first women's group in 2008. I was then asked to start the women's group for the company I worked in 2010. I wrote my first book in 2011. I didn't go to Sedona until 2014, and I didn't have my tower moment until 2016. So I would say it happened over a series of years. And it happened off the side of my desk. So I am not a big proponent of jumping out to jump into your passion projects or your life goals. I think
Yeah.
building a path for you to identify where can you serve, how can you exchange your services for revenue, what is your market, what problems are you solving, like really working through that in parallel to the work that you're doing now. Because one of the things that even happened in 2016, even though I had an 8 year runway, I went through a ton of self doubt. 6 months after I ended up in a therapist's office, I didn't know who I was. I had always associated myself to my title, my salary, the project I was working on, the technology I was championing. And when all of that was stripped away, I really didn't know who I was. And that really fostered part of that seeking because I had to be okay with not living on the labels. And my whole life, I was trying to get there and be the person and get the title and get that amount of money and get those miles, whatever it is. And when you take all of those away, it's very lonely, one. And two, it's hard to know who you really are because when you're used to describing yourself by what you do and you're figuring out what you do, even though you have some momentum around it, it took a lot of work. And I think that really is what spun me into the inner work. So little did I know after publishing the first two books of like figuring it out, how to keep everything going, how to keep balanced, how to get there, that I really had my biggest work ahead, which was working from the inside out.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, and I always like to say that I climbed the corporate ladder and then fell all the way down. And
Yeah.
that deconstruction process and the egoic pain you feel from losing your status, your symbol, your financial security, whatever it might be. For me, that was a big thing. You know, I was have always been a very ambitious person, and in my early 30s fell off the corporate ladder and hit every rung on the way down. But it was such a, I wouldn't trade that experience for anything, because it really, it helped aid in my awakening and deconstruction to really finding out who I was like you did. So I love that you said that, because I had a very similar experience. So in your book, you also talk about when we do start to awaken and we start to deconstruct and we start to ask like deeper questions, because if we aren't our jobs, if we aren't our marriages, if we aren't our um, whatever the label is, you can fill in the blank there. We do start to ask like deep questions, like what is next? What is the meaning of my life? What am I doing here? For you, when somebody starts to have that bubbling up of an awakening and an expansion, what would you say or recommend for them as their next logical step to help them get through that?
Well, I would definitely say that I would invest in some mindfulness training. This is not something I thought of myself when I ended up at the therapist and I was going through all these things. She was like, you really need to get into mindfulness. And I thought it was absolutely ridiculous, kind of the dumbest thing I've ever heard, to be quite honest. And when I went back the next time, she really was firm and she said, don't come back until you go to mindfulness training. You are in your head every day. Everything is determined by your thoughts. And if you need more joy in your life, if you need to find compassion, if you need to figure out who you are, you need to be in the present moment. And so it was an 8-week course designed by John Kabat-Zinn, taught by a local woman, Suzanne. And it took me 3 classes probably to really kind of sink into it. The first two, I was absolutely obnoxious. I couldn't relax. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't bring my notebook. Like I had all these issues of just being. I was so
Mm-hmm.
conditioned to do, I didn't know how to be. And it has taken me a long time to really work myself out of my head. And what mindfulness has done for me is given me space to recognize that I am not my thoughts, which was such a profound step in my journey that has given me even more insight to kind of why I'm here and what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, just to dig a little deeper here with this idea of like the stillness and being. Did you ever uncover what was the root cause for your inability to stay present before you got on the mindfulness path? I think we all uncover what that is, but do you know what that root cause was for you?
Well,
Projecting yourself
I
into
think
the
we're all,
future, like,
I think the energy of the planet does not want us to be present, right? So we are conditioned to not be present from an early age. We're handing iPads to 1-year-olds, right? Where our TV is like tell a vision. It's telling us what vision we should have for ourselves. It's an orchestration of probably negative energy or dark energy that really doesn't want us to our souls to be awakened. And so we have to work really hard to break out of that energy. And on a like micro level, I grew up with a family that we had no money, and so I had to produce at such an early age. So I was part of the production cycle that helped my family eat and get clothes and all that. And so that was just an engine that started probably way before I remember. But the combo of
hmm.
those two energies kept me very busy for a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I feel like everyone has a different root cause for that. And it's just always interesting to me to understand, like, what was that for them? For me, it was through my religious experience where there was like all this fear related to like what was going to happen to you after you die. So you were like never here in the moment. You were never like, you were just perpetually afraid of your soul. Like, what's going to happen to your soul today? Like, if you died today, would you go to heaven? So it was like that perpetual projecting yourself into the future was such a real thing based in my religious experience that really took me away. And the industriousness also that you find with, families of minorities and immigrants, and the religious idea of, idle hands are the work of the devil, so you better work your ass off. So it was like those two things combined for me, just like I had to really unpack that as well. So it's so interesting and fascinating. I think the density of this world too, like you said, on the micro and the micro levels, it's real to try to get through all of that. So
And we
when
know
we're
it,
thinking,
you know.
go
We
ahead.
I'm, we know it. We know it. Before we come down here, we know it's going to be a lot of work. I just think we have no idea how much work it's really going to be because when we come from the other side, there's so much love and light and connectiveness to each other. And then we come down here and we're like in combat zone. It's like everyone for themselves. We don't even know how to love each other. We don't know how to connect with each other. We are inundated with fear, as you mentioned, from so many different avenues that it's amazing that people awaken.
It really is. Well, and if you think about it, like I feel like it's about right now, at least, it's somewhere between like 25 and probably 35% of our world is, but because there's so much fear, these circles, because we run in them, feel like robust and there's all these people. But if you think about us in the context of the 6 billion people that live on Earth, we are a very small minority of people who are pushing up against the density, pushing up against the conditioning, the domestication, just the dumbing down and numbing down of the human spirit is just, it's so real. And it's I love that you said that it can be challenging because it is. And I'm a realist, so I never want to like sugarcoat anything.
I love that.
I also wanted to ask you, in terms of strategies to infuse more purpose and meaning into people's life, in your book, I wondered if you had like one or two things that you might be able to share with the audience they can do once they start to get through the muck of the awakening and really find, their focus and where they want to contribute to the collective. How do they add more purpose and meaning there?
Well, I think as I mentioned before, like mindfulness for sure is a great first step because it allows us the space to remember. It allows us the space to hear our whispers, which are things from that are coming deep within. They're not loud, they're not obnoxious, they're just thoughts that come forward. The mindfulness may even give us the ability to connect at a deeper level or with other skill sets that we haven't tapped into. And so I'm a huge proponent of creating that space for yourself so that you can learn to be in the present moment. And if you are in the present moment, you don't have the worry, anxiety, fear, doubt that you often experience when you're spending so much time in your head, which is usually reflecting on the past or planning for the future. And so learning to be in the present moment has given me such insight to that information that comes my way through conversations, through things that cross my desk, through people that come to me. I get a ton of messaging through other people that I can't say I really recognized before I was really mindful or in the present moment because I was so busy getting things done. And so if I'm having a hard time being in the present moment, I often just tap my fingers together, tap my toes, like even at my desk, if I feel like I'm too much in my head, I just really try to ground myself. Just really visualize pulling energy from the top of my head down through my body, through my legs, and into the ground. And I really ground as much as possible. Even at my desk, I can do it at airports, I do it in lines, like wherever I am, I'm constantly grounding my energy that's no longer serving me. And I think the last thing that I do pretty regularly is having gratitude. And it's not just for the good things, right? It's for just the very little things like, hey, thanks for stopping me at the stoplight. I was probably going too fast and a cop just passed. So that thank you for that stoplight. Or thank you for a funny thing is I just got a legal message that I owe some money on a photo that was on one of my websites. And normally that would send me into a tailspin. But I had gratitude right away. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I did not know I was using that photo, so I want to make sure that that artist gets paid. But I also want to take down that website. I haven't used it in years. It hasn't been a priority to me. Let's just clear that out. That small fee might have saved me a lot of money in the long run, and it's just forcing me to pay attention to that aspect of my work. So I'm super grateful for things that cross my path, even when I feel like, or even when I used to feel like I was a victim, like, I can't believe this happened to me. I don't say that anymore. I'm like, thank you, or why is this happening, or what is the lesson? And I feel like the universe is really set up to help me as long as I'm paying attention and understanding what's coming my way, what is the lesson. So I think that's been really a game changer for me in my work and in my life.
Those are really good. Thank you so much. Those I think are going to help people a lot when they're listening to this interview. And I think it ties into my next question around you talk in the book specifically about overcoming obstacles. And I was curious in your words and in your own experience, I think I think we can break up these two things, these obstacles as two things, like real obstacles and then like perceived obstacles. So for you, when you're working with people and you're trying to help them understand where are the real obstacles, where are the obstacles that we put in place so we don't have to be seen or we don't have to try too hard or we don't have to, get out of our own comfort zone. Can you talk a little bit about both of those types of obstacles and then what you're doing to help people identify them and work past them?
Mm. One of the greatest things I've learned is that we really don't have to worry about the how. Oftentimes, you just have to visualize the goal and not worry about every little detail. I was talking to a woman last night. We were going through her birth chart. We were just chatting about it, and she wants to get a raise. And she's like, I'm going to ask him for the raise, but, and then she tells me 5 reasons why she's not going to get the raise. And I'm like, do you want the raise? She's like, yes. Well, why are you creating all of this energy around not getting the raise? She's like, I'm not. I'm like, well, you're already providing the reasons you shouldn't get the raise. And I recited them back to her, and she was like, no, that's what they're going to say. And I'm like, no, that's what you said. You don't know what they're going to say. And you're already creating this story around what they're going to say when you ask them for the raise. Like, you need to visualize getting the raise and even acting like you already have the raise. Book that trip you want. Do something. You already have the raise. And I know money's a little tricky, and I have lots of chapters on how people perceive money and the energy they give money. But the idea is many times we are defining how things are going to happen before we even open it up for discussion. So I think a lot of us need to sit back and be like, I'm not going to worry about the how. I just know this is going to be. So I'm planning this bike trip for these women. And I'm like, this is the company I want to work with. This is the bike trip I want to do. And when I was talking to a friend about it, they're like, well, they don't do that with anybody else. They don't, how is that going to happen? I'm like, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to worry about it. If I'm meant to do that, it's going to work itself out. If I sit here and plan every step, I'm creating all this energy around the situation that may or may not be true. So I put the email in through LinkedIn. I emailed this woman through LinkedIn. She got back to me 5 weeks later. She said she was going to connect me to somebody, which didn't happen for another 2 months. Just 2 weeks ago, I finally had the call with them. And they were like, that would be amazing. It was like a 3.5 month pipeline from the time I sent the first message. But I was determined that this is going to happen, that I didn't create any energy around it. I said, this is going to happen. I can't wait for them to call me back. This is going to be so fun when I put this together.
I love that example. That is like such a good, solid example of like visualizing the end game, letting go of the hows, and then just working towards it no matter what. That is powerful. Yeah, I think it's interesting too with when we have, our internal obstacles, and part of the awakening, and I'll be interested in how you think these two things are tied. As we get let go of parts of our identity, we also see how much we're saying no to ourselves about things. That example with the woman on the with the raise is a great example of that. But it- when we start to say no to ourselves, what do you think that's actually about?
Fear. Totally 100% fear. So I give a lot of talks to women's groups around the world. I work for a lot of ERG groups, a lot of women in business groups, and I used to go in there years ago and talk about, okay, this is how you get the raise, this is how you find the sponsor, this is how you get the board seat. But now, before I even get into any of that, I talk about self-doubt because I could tell you exactly the steps, but what I can't do is change the way you are thinking about a situation. And so I go through a series of activities with women to talk about what they want to achieve, but then talk about all the things they're saying to themselves about that goal or about that
Mm,
aspiration. And I list out a ton of fears because most people, when you ask them, what are you afraid of? They say spiders, snakes, heights. But in reality, people are more afraid of being embarrassed, looking silly, feeling like they don't belong, feeling like they can't do it, people talking behind their backs, stretching before they feel like they're ready, feeling like they're out of place or out of alignment in their work. So the fears are overwhelming. And all of us have them. Absolutely all of us. I have them. You have, we all have them. The idea of using mindfulness is it gives you the ability to recognize when those stories, when those fears are coming to the forefront. And I often quote Jen Sincero. I love her and I love her books. And she always says the way she gets around the fears, which I have adopted, is she says, let me see what I can do. Let me see what I can do. Because if I just say see, I'm not committing to an outcome. I'm not committing to get it done. I'm just checking it out. And so I'm a huge proponent of saying, let's just see what you can do this week or this month based on something that's important to you, based on something that you have been thinking about doing. And I think the book Seeking for me has been a way to show people that you can do baby steps to lean into what is calling you. You can create a pathway just a couple hours a week off the side of your desk to create something that's been on your heart. Even if you have doubts, we all have them. You can just make that phone call. You can send that email. You can buy that URL. And I think for a lot of us, we are being tasked with, is it important enough to us right now? Because there's so many interfering energies and ideas and everyone else's stuff that you are the only one that can commit to you and your life's work. And you do need to do that one step at a time. So what is calling you now and how do you lean into that? Just the first step, just the first step.
I think there's a lot, I think right now too with the shift with entrepreneurial work and a lot of coaches and this idea of like being more independently free to work and not in a traditional work system, there is also this, I think, misconception about, going super big fast, like doing all the things all at once, even if you have an inkling of an idea of what that is, like you should quit your job and you should, you said earlier, like you like the idea of working in parallel. I do as well. Giving people that space and that safety net, I think is real, and people need that. And that idea of going big and fast and going, over the top, I think can really undermine, that little spark inside the person that is saying to them, like, I really want to do this thing. And so if they're struggling with feeling like it's not enough if they do just a little thing at a little time, do you have any more words of encouragement around that?
Well, some of us get ideas years and years ago. You might have been carrying something since a child. It could be something that popped up 5 years ago. I get whispers of things to do, and I'm always like, oh, how could I ever do that? Like, I got a whisper when I was speaking in San Francisco, or actually, it was Seattle. I was coming off a stage and I said, bring the women together outside. And I thought it meant like right now. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. But I sat on that idea for 2 years and I finally leaned on an energy practitioner by the name of Dora. I called her up. I'm like, I keep getting this message, bring the women together outside. And she's like, well, what does it mean to you? And I'm like, well, all these women are in corporate and in these roles and they're not connecting to Mother Nature. They're forgetting about their wisdom. They're forgetting about their inner knowing. And I need to get them out of that space to remind them that they are part of something bigger, that their energy is gargantuous compared to the sliver that we remember in our body. And she's like, okay, great. Why aren't you doing it? I'm like, well, I don't want to let anybody down. I don't know what to build. She said, I don't know how much to charge. I've never even gone to a retreat before. And she said so softly and so beautifully, JJ, build what you want to go to. Build what you want to go to. And I tell that story because I feel like so many of us are using a measuring stick outside of us, that we're determining our success based on what other people will think. And if you just build what is calling you, build what is important to you, build what is on your soul, there is no wrong answer. There's no wrong answer. And you already know how to do your life's work. You came down here with that wisdom. So you are only wasting time by not leaning into something that is calling you. And I will tell you that just last month I had my 14th retreat. 14th retreat from someone who's never had a retreat before. And the last one I had 45 women. So, like, if I can do it, if I can lean into something I've never done, never been to, you can lean into whatever is calling you to.
That leads in so perfectly to my next question I wanted to talk to you about. You touch on in the book about inner knowing, and this means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But for you, first, let's define what you refer to as inner knowing, and then why is it important for us to cultivate and return to that inner knowing when we go on this path?
Hmm. Wonderful question. As I talked about before, most of us are striving and stretching outside our body, and that everything we need to do and know is actually inside of us. That we are teardrops of a higher light, a higher energy. We come with everything packaged inside of us, and we are dropped into this body. And when we come into this body, our eyes turn on, our heads turn on, everything gets going. And I believe that a lot of us struggle for the first half of our life to recognize that we have more knowing than we tap into. And so if you are going through an awakening, if you are feeling like it's time to emerge in a new way, the goal is to get that light and that energy to work with you. And the way I've done that is use mindfulness to sort of not follow everything I'm thinking and allow myself to drop from my head into my heart. And so I make it very simple. I just put my hand on my heart and I just take a minute. I close my eyes and say, how does this feel? How does this feel? And if I don't hold on to any one thought and I just really drop my whole self into the center of my body and just say, how does this feel? I know right away if I should lean in or lean out. But
Right.
oftentimes we don't make that kind of time. We feel silly. We think, oh, how could that be possible? But you have every bit of knowing already with you that your goal in this lifetime is to tap into that knowing as often as you can.
I think it's interesting too that if you're just coming into consciousness with your intuition or your inner knowing, that to your point, we all know that it's there, but when you start to really pay attention to it, and even if you're integrating mindfulness practices around it, that the more you listen to it, the more clear it becomes. And then you also can see where you haven't listened to it in the past and it goes again, you go against yourself and there's a different outcome that isn't as desirable, or maybe you have to like backtrack or take a few steps back to go forward. When we think about, honing that inner guidance, what is one thing that you would say is the most important aside from like feeling that thing, but is there anything else that we would want to share with the audience here about like cultivating that knowing deeply?
I've done so much work. I don't know if I could pinpoint one thing. I mean, I really work on raising my frequency, raising my energy. And to do that, I have to be super mindful of what I pay attention to, what I watch, what I think about, what I read.
Mm,
And the whole
yeah,
reason is to really have that sacred space of just being in the energy of my soul, really just being connected to Mother Nature, recognizing that
yeah,
I'm part of this galactic system of energy that is here to support me. And I feel like it is something that I'm still working on. At times I'm like, am I crazy? Is this really happening? Do I really know what I'm doing? Am I supposed to be doing this? Like I still have those moments too. I am not by any means done with this journey of seeking, but I will tell you that it more times than not, I am guided. People show up, the money comes, the opportunity presents itself. And I know this because when I'm really working to be in the present moment, I see it happening before my eyes. And even my retreat space that started in the small little cottage of like 1,200 square feet, I now have a retreat space just down the road that is incredible. And I feel like it is a nod from the universe, like, we got you. And I think you'll start to feel that. And people that are already on this path, I think will agree. They start to see things unfold much bigger than you could ever imagine for yourself. But getting around those stories in your head, understanding what you're saying to yourself all the time, really knowing, are you working only from your head energy, or do you have a combination of your head and your heart? And like, what are the practices you're doing? Like, are you out getting bombed every 4 nights a week and then trying to recover the other three? Like, you have to take care of yourself. You have to invest in yourself. You have to believe in yourself that you're worthy for what is calling you, because you would not be getting those messages if they weren't for you.
I think it's so important that point that you hit on back there about like what are we feeding ourselves? I know obviously so I'm not far behind you in age as well, but like even just with the dawn of social media and the just how television has blown up, how like your phone is just constantly you have a barrage of information available to you all the time if you engage in it. One of the first swamis I ever worked with, she one of the things that she was about was having that cleanliness of mind, you know, like not filling your mind up with so many distractions and having, you know, mindful hygiene around what's entering, like feeding your brain just the way you would your body. And I really have always taken that to heart. And I'm someone who really enjoys silence too. So, like, my first touch point with meditation was through silent meditation because that felt the most natural to me. I really like quietude. But I think it's interesting to just underline that point that like being able to even get in touch with the inner knowing requires us to create space. And creating that space means removing distractions and, you know, finding where it's most natural for us to listen. And sometimes that means like shutting off this podcast that you're listening to, or, you know, turning off your television, or like driving in your car without the radio, like little really minor things that can make a huge difference with being able to connect with your inner knowing, which I think is really beautiful.
That's so beautiful and so true. And I think we're just, again, there's energy out there that's trying to condition us to be busy all the time and to pay attention to what matters. And, my device, my cell phone, I'm a huge Audibles listener. So if you see me listening, I'm listening to a book. I watch
Hmm.
YouTube meditations. That's one of my favorite things. Steve Noble is my favorite on YouTube for meditations. I love his meditations. And I use YouTube TV, so I record the shows I want to watch. I don't even pay attention to commercials. And, I definitely am not watching any like horror energy killing, hurting
Hmm.
people. I just can't even handle that energy anymore. And unfortunately, some of my friends have sort of drifted away too. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you start to raise your frequency and you start to get into this awakened state. Some of the relationships that have been with you a while might not be front and center anymore. And that can be hard too. That's not been super easy for me, but I know it's
Hmm.
for my bigger calling and my bigger self. And I just have to recognize that as I raise my frequency, the universe is going to meet my frequency, and the people that were at lower frequency may or may not rise up with me.
Yeah, it's such a real part of this process where you almost can't engage with the people you used to, and you do seem like such a champion for women and a girl's girl, so I can imagine what that has been like to have to navigate friendships that fall away. That's definitely been something I think all of us on this path have to deal with it, and it's not fun and it's sad and it's a weird part of the experience. I did want to ask you one more follow-up question back to when you were talking about getting the women outside. Um, is that I think it's interesting too about when you think about getting back into nature. I've often said on the podcast a lot, you know, like that's where I felt for the first time in my life, the divine when I was like much younger, going into like beautiful natural spaces and being like, oh man, this energy just feels like nothing. And I take my dog to the woods every day, and as soon as I'm in those woods by ourselves, it's like something just it's like getting clicked into a seat or putting your seatbelt on, and you just feel like held and supported. I'm just curious for you, like what's been your relationship with nature and the divine, and cultivating that as part of your practice as well.
Mm, I love it. I love it. I mean, I connect with nature in so many ways. One is just sitting in my office. I watch the birds fly by all the time now. They come, the
Yeah.
hummingbirds come a lot, the butterflies. But like you, sometimes I just go out and sit outside. I mean, I didn't really do
Hmm.
that in the last 2 decades, but now I just sit outside. I lay sometimes, I just try to gain the heat from the sun. Sometimes I'll just lay down,
Yes.
even like in my business clothes, I'll just be like, I just need to be on the ground. And people are like, oh my gosh, there's ticks and there's this. And yes, there are all those things, but I don't care. I just sometimes
Yeah.
just need to be laying on the ground. And even in my retreats, I'm like, let's just walk through the grass barefoot. It sounds like,
Yeah.
such a easy thing and
Heaven.
it's in so many movies, but the mindful walking is such a powerful thing to just notice. I'm always like, let's notice 20 things right now with as many different senses as you can. And it can get challenging at first, but then once you kind of get into it, you're like, oh, and this and this and this and this and this. And it just reminds you again that you're part of something so much bigger. You are not on this journey alone. You are not.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really powerful. I think like nature too just has so many lessons and reflects such a beautiful piece of what our true nature is, which is like things are messy and it's okay in nature. And like nature accepts you as you are because it's not trying to be any different. So there's all these like really beautiful lessons you can find in nature if you allow yourself to open up. I think it's such I feel like I have such a special bond with being outside, and I do that too. Like sometimes when I work from home, I have a remote position and have for years, and like sometimes it's just like if I feel stressed, I just walk outside and I put my feet into the ground and I just allow myself to feel like Mother Earth like just supporting me, and it makes such a difference to my mental health and my well-being. Like something so little, but it makes such a huge difference.
It does. And I can't believe I didn't say this before, but when I have retreats now, once I usually wait until I get a couple messages. Like someone will say, you're going to
Hmm.
have a retreat this weekend. And then a practitioner will be like, let's put a retreat together. What do you think about this weekend? And it comes to me in three different ways, usually when I'm putting something together. But I take that outside on my front porch and I say, I'll just wait for a second and I'll say, I'm thinking to put this retreat together. It's this day. These are the practitioners. This is the healing we want to do. These are some of the lessons we hope to capture. What do you think? Like I'm talking to a girlfriend. I mean, if my neighbors are watching me, they're like, there she is again, just talking to nobody. But it is amazing because if it is meant to be, the wind picks up, the birds start chirping louder. It's like a validation that I can't even really express to you online. You have to try it for yourself. It's just unbelievable. And even though right now the trees just picked up, it's just an unbelievable system of energy that you can work with. And so if you're unsure, go out and talk to the trees about what you're dealing with and just kind of see how you feel about it from your heart chakra and also notice what is happening outside. I mean, all these leaves on this tree that were not moving when I first started telling you are now all moving. So it's
Right?
unbelievable how they're like, we're here for you. So you can use nature as a validation system too.
Yeah, it's really powerful. Oh man, so many answers in the wind, I tell you. It's amazing. So we're getting close to the end right now, and I just want to give you some space to tell the people who are listening and watching, like, what are you working on right now? What do you have going on? Are you promoting anything in particular? Anything you've got sort of in your bucket to go out in the next, like, towards the end of the year? Because we this will be out in about a month, but
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I would say that I'm always sort of listening. The next couple things, I'm going to do a multi like adventure bike trip for women in 2024. I'm also going to work on helping more women get published. I think the publishing industry is really challenging for women.
hmm,
And the whole story of my books and how it has all unfolded over the last 13 years is a lot. And I would love to teach women some of the lessons that I've learned in publishing and help more women's voices, especially in the spiritual and healing space, get out there because I feel like we really are working to balance the masculine and feminine energy as we move from the fifth sun to the
absolutely.
sixth sun. So this is just how I hope to contribute. And I look forward to connecting. So I'm always posting things, and my whole goal is just to share what I learn as often as I can. So hopefully I'll meet you online on many of the platforms.
Yeah, so and where do you hang out mostly on social media? Where are your favorite places and what are your handles?
Yeah, so my handle's JJ DiGeronimo, and I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram, and then I have a community called Together We Seek .online where I interview all the energy practitioners that I'm working with to make it easier for you to select energy practitioners to help you on your journey.
Very cool. Well, I actually like to end on gratitude myself here on the show. So I always like to check in with my guests and see what three things they're grateful for in this moment, this week, this year, kind of anything that's rattling around in your heart center.
Well, I'm definitely grateful for this conversation. I think the more of us that have this conversation about what it takes to be awakened, what it means, why we should be awakened, and all the challenges that it is to even get to this moment right now is so validating for all of us. So I'm super grateful to have this conversation. And I'm grateful to be a conduit for the universe to share energies and strategies to help more people lean into what is calling them.
That's beautiful. Man, that's really succinct too. I appreciate it. Well, I had such a wonderful time with you and so many things that resonated and I will be once and I'm in post production, I know I'll pick apart a few more nuggets of wisdom here. So I really appreciate you coming to the podcast today and doing this with me today, JJ.
Oh, anytime. I hope we get to do it again. Thank you.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Xiomara, in alignment with LightCasting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.